Okay, it looks like we are live. Welcome, everyone. My name is Kristen Giffen. I'm Chief of Staff of Lift Aircraft, and I'm coming to you from the Austin area, which is where we're headquartered and where the company was founded. And I am joined by Matt Chasen, who is CEO and founder of Lift Aircraft. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Kristen.
We're really excited about this afternoon. Thank you all so much for joining us and giving us generously of your time. We're going to do our very best to respect that time and wrap this up in an hour, but we also want to make sure that we have an opportunity to answer as many of your questions as possible. So Matt's going to share a presentation with everyone. Please send us your questions as the presentation is ongoing. We'll be making notes of your questions and we'll be going back and referring to those and answering, like I said, as many as possible. Those that we aren't able to answer while we're live during this webinar, we will follow up with you and answer your questions separately via email. There will be a recording of this webinar available following the conclusion, so keep an eye out for that. That will be emailed to everyone. Yeah, am I missing anything, Matt?
Yeah, it sounds good to me.
I
Ready to
think
get
that,
started.
yeah, I think that covers it. Let's get started. I'm going to go off camera and hand everyone over to Matt.
Well, thank you so much, Kristen. Appreciate that intro and welcome everyone. Excited to share with you guys a bit of an overview of Lift Aircraft and our progress to date. I'll save a good amount of time for questions. I expect there will be many. Well, great. Let's dive in. I'm sure many of you are either investors or prospective investors in Lyft, and or maybe you're just bored on a Tuesday. Either way, this should be informative and fun. Let's start by sharing kind of the problem that we're addressing in the long run. So, as we all know, traffic is reached sort of epidemic proportions in the U.S. and around the world. Road transportation is really broken. 54 hours stuck in traffic for the average American. Many possible solutions, one of which we believe that we must go vertical, and in a way different than traditional helicopters, which have been around for a long time, but noise and sort of mechanical complexity and cost have plagued traditional helicopters. When we looked at this problem 6 years ago, we took a kind of first principles approach to a solution, right? So if you think about what you're doing sitting in traffic in your car most trips, it's the following. Over 85% of car trips are short range, 15 miles or fewer, and 90% of those trips in the US are single occupants, just the driver. So really, the majority of the problem here is how do you move one human being over a short distance, right, by air rather than by car. So many of you have seen Hexa. I'll go over quickly just some of the key features of our aircraft. Hexa has 18 motors, propellers, and a distributed battery system. So each of those motors has its own small battery pack. This allows for a lot of weight savings. It allows for a pretty high level of redundancy. Multiple motors can be lost. Any failure in any of these powertrain units would result in just the loss of one motor. In the event of a major loss of control, we do have a ballistic parachute that deploys autonomously. It's designed to be effective without needing any horizontal speed down to a very low altitude of 12 meters, which is around 40 feet above the ground. As many of you may know, electric motors are really inherently very reliable. There's really only one moving part. Hexa is flown by the pilot on board using a single joystick that has 3-axis control. And if any of you have flown small drones, it's very similar, actually easier in many ways, and uses GPS position control. So pressing forward on the joystick just moves your position forward in space. The aircraft's flight control system does all the math to know, how much thrust to produce and what RPM to run each motor to achieve that desired trajectory. So speaking of the flight controller, we have a triply redundant with the possibility of a fourth dissimilar autopilot also that controls the aircraft. It takes your inputs from the joystick and converts those into instructions for the motors. And as I said, it's redundant. So in the event of a failure in software or in hardware of one of the three core flight controllers, it will simply switch over to use one of the other ones. Really fantastic system. We've got a lot of experience with it now, and it's proven highly reliable. There's a user interface on board. It is actually an iPad Pro with a touchscreen. Provides information to the pilot during flight. It's very intuitive and simple. You'll also notice Hexa has floats. It's an amphibious aircraft, so it can take off and land on water. As some of you know, we're not selling Hexa to individuals. I know others in this emerging electric vertical takeoff and landing industry are selling aircraft to individuals. Some are, pursuing using different sizes of these aircraft for commercial air taxi operations. Our approach is somewhere in between. We have built a fleet, actually, already of 16 production Hexa aircraft. And our plans are to develop multiple lift locations, where anyone can visit and train and fly Hexa on a pay-per-flight rental basis. For initially the beginner training and a beginner certification with us is just $249. So as I'll mention in the future, we've actually activated our first location here in Austin, and we've already launched a tour to kick off our 25-city plan tour in the US, and we've done demonstrations and exhibitions in several cities around the world to showcase flying Hexa. But we are one of, if not the first, eVTOL operator to launch operations in the US. So at a location, you get instruction. It's about 30 to 60 minutes. There's a classroom section of that instruction. There's a VR flight simulator that you practice your maneuvering in. When you're ready there, you go out and you solo. We're currently training in groups of 4 and operating multiple sessions per day from our vertiport in Austin, Texas. We do have air traffic controllers, ground station operators that are monitoring and supervising your flight. We're tracking weather, we're tracking traffic in the area. Our beginner flights are in a relatively small constrained area with geofences around it and a hard ceiling and a hard deck, so that kind of no matter what the pilot does on board the aircraft, they're initially limited to within this beginner flight envelope. So, with that introduction to kind of what we're building at Lyft, I'll share a little bit about what the market looks like. So Morgan Stanley, I think, has done some of the most forecasting in the space. They estimate the market for electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft to approach 1 trillion by 2040. And there's multiple segments here ranging from emergency response use, the use we envision for Hexa, military and defense. We've had several contracts with DoD agencies at this point, and entertainment and recreation. Our initial sort of go-to-market strategy centers around our ultralight classification, which allows for sort of personal flights for generally entertainment and recreational use. We can talk more about that. What's great about this segment is that there's no pilot license required to fly Hexa, and there's no FAA certification required to allow Hexa to fly in the U.S. So we'll talk more about that here. I wanted to share this slide with you all that shows some of the players in the eVTOL space, including us. This slide was developed by McKinsey and Company for a webinar that I participated in earlier this year. It shows, when different eVTOL developers expect to receive type certification for their aircraft, as well as commence commercial operations. And as you can see here, we are one of the first, and the first in the US to, at this time, we're anticipated to launch operations, pay-per flight operations under Part 103. And we've since done that. We actually launched our first paid revenue rental operations in Q4 of last year, and have, like I mentioned earlier, we've launched our tour. We've now done thousands of flights that are revenue paid flights. So among the leaders in the space in terms of timeline to launch. To go into a little more detail on our history, we were founded back in late 2017. Spent the first year designing and actually built our first manned prototype and flew it all within the first year. Turns out that's kind of the easy part. What is difficult, and what we've spent the next 4 or 5 years doing, is really thoroughly testing our vehicle. We put it through 3 phases of testing, including significant testing with the U.S. Air Force under several different contracts, which required an airworthiness approval that we received in 2021. We proceeded into sort of alpha and beta flight testing, and along the meantime, we're also confirmed by the Light Aircraft Manufacturers Association for our compliance under Part 103. So we opened our Austin operational test facility in 23, when we commenced our beta flights. And then, as I mentioned, we started doing our first revenue commercial flights late 23 and into 24. So what's our plan for rolling this out now that we have one location operating, and we have our tour started to sort of give people an introduction to flying Hexa? We anticipate the next several years really being opening one lift location in a given market. We're looking at kind of the top 25 urban areas in the US and around the world, and looking for areas in those cities that we can fly from, with adjacent uncongested flyover areas. So we're initially going to start flying Hexa over uncongested areas to minimize any risk to persons or property in those metro areas. This example shows, for example, San Francisco Bay Area. We've had discussions with the Port of San Francisco to do flights from one of the piers there, and launching flights where people can get trained, again, experience Hexa, fly in a scenic area, really enjoy the thrill and experience of flying in a personal vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. So we anticipate opening locations for this purpose in the US and around the world. Followed then, a few years later, by opening up other areas, right? Sort of still over, generally uncongested areas, again, to minimize noise and other interference with people in congested cities, but also to allow people to fly from kind of point to point. From, again, these are Lyft owned or partner owned and operated, approved vertiports that have infrastructure for you to take off and land, charge batteries, swap batteries, etc., and perform maintenance on the aircraft. We are tracking very closely new regulations, actually. I'll get into that here in a minute. The FAA has recently proposed new rules to the next heavier aircraft class called light sport aircraft. That will allow HEXA, we believe, and other electric vertical take on landing aircraft to basically conform to a modernized version of that light sport class, which will change the nature of what we're able to do with HEXA in a material way. We will be, under those rules, allowed to fly over congested areas in controlled airspace. It removes a lot of the limitations that are on ultralight aircraft. However, there will be some other changes. There will be a pilot's license, a certain type of pilot's license required to fly in those expanded use cases. So we do envision in the sort of mid to long-term future, HEXA having many bases in an area, allowing people to fly freely between them, including over congested areas. So, economically, it looks like a fantastic business. Again, we've proven all these numbers with our initial operations. We're charging a minimum of $249. Technically, that's a rental of the aircraft by the pilot and for training. Flights are up to 15 minutes. We cycle actually 4 flights per hour, allowing one aircraft to do roughly 40 flights in a day, at least have 40 flight slots in a day. With weather and high winds and other factors that limit utilization of the aircraft, we expect to see about 70% utilization of these aircraft at our locations, which results in over $2 million per aircraft per year. Some cost figures here too. Ultimately, it's a very profitable business. That's part of the advantage of launching this as a recreational or entertainment experience, is that we can charge different prices than if this were being used from day one for transportation. I mentioned some new rules that the FAA recently announced, just to give people an overview of the current rules we fly under. It's CFR Part 103. I've mentioned the class is ultralights. There's no pilot's license needed. Anyone can fly this aircraft. We do have age and weight limitations initially. HEXA has no airworthiness certification from the FAA. So we've, of course, done our own testing and have our own certification procedures for this, but that's an internal. We have a safety advisory board. We've engaged with experts on this to really validate HEXA's many safety features. Ultralights are limited to flights in uncontrolled airspace. That's Class G airspace. Thankfully, most airspace around the U.S. is Class G, from the ground up to around 1,200 feet above ground level. Almost everywhere is Class G, except around major airports. Controlled airports have usually 5-mile controlled airspace around them. But anywhere else is fair game to fly. Daytime only under Part 103. And the weight limit for Part 103 is really strict, which for is a real engineering challenge for an electric aircraft. So we have limited weight to dedicate to batteries. So our ultralight aircraft has kind of what we call our standard range batteries. But let me introduce you to kind of the new rules that the FAA has proposed under what's called MOSAIC, which I think stands for Modernization of the Special Airworthiness Certification for light sport aircraft. So the FAA has already proposed this. Much of our industry was eagerly awaiting this for several years. And the rules came out kind of as expected, and we expect HEXA, as it is, to be certifiable under these new rules. Now, that's a special airworthiness certificate. The exact standards are being developed and will be released here in the coming months and quarters. We have already designed HEXA and tested HEXA to conform to what we expect these standards to be. So we think a special certification process for us will be quite straightforward. This will unlock flying Hexa over congested areas and into controlled airspace with permission. Actually, we can fly into controlled airspace with air traffic control permission. Even today, we have flown on a regular basis in controlled airspace, in fact. But what this really will allow us to do is add extended range batteries. These can be swappable with the ultralight range batteries, but we actually have tested new batteries that are slightly heavier, too heavy for ultralight qualification, but that have the potential to double our flight time with those new batteries. So we're really excited to continue testing. We think this is going to be kind of a Hexa version 2 or Hexa Pro version that will be certified under the new Mosaic rules and will really unlock the use cases and add additional range. As I said, the downside is it will require some sort of pilot's license. Right now, there is a sport pilot's license. This is likely to be revised for different types of aircraft. The FAA is still working this out. So, we're extremely excited about introducing, this new mode of transportation, this new form of flying to the world. And the world has responded in a big way. I think people are excited, frustrated with traffic, but also transportation aside, I think people are kind of wired to want to experience flight. And I'm not talking about flight at 30,000 feet in a commercial airliner. I mean the thrill of taking off, controlling an aircraft yourself, and flying around, relatively low and slow. It is an unbelievable experience. I unfortunately, I think general aviation has been on a decline because of the extreme cost and time required to get a traditional pilot's license. I have my pilot's license. One of the reasons I founded Lift Aircraft was because it's hard to stay current. It's hard to fly traditional aircraft. There is, a lot of skill that's required, and all of these new technologies sort of align to enable people to fly without all that expense. And so we've gotten tremendous press over the years and been invited all over the world to do demonstrations. We're really excited that we've launched, and anyone even today can visit our website, book a flight and training in Austin, and we're sold out for the next weeks and months, but we have openings open for the remainder of this year in Austin, and of course we also have over 15,000 people on wait lists in these 25 cities for this tour we started. So we've already invited our wait list in Tampa and Orlando to fly. We've completed those flights, and we'll be announcing the next city for our tour soon. I did mention our Austin location where we started some of our flight testing. We did our alpha flights and now have done beta flights and have paper flights running today. This is at a facility near Austin that we moved into in May of 2023. This site is great. We're using it for both, partly for paper flight operations, partly for training new staff. As we grow, we're going to be hiring and training new staff. So this facility is set up perfect for that. This is also where we do some of our expanded flight envelope testing on an ongoing basis. I briefly mentioned earlier the opportunity for public agencies and first responders to utilize Hexa in particular. The FAA allows public agencies to fly ultralights for public use missions, and they're able to be flown. No type certification is required, just like individuals can fly. No pilot's license is required. So public agencies literally can put Hexa to use to serve the public good, to serve emergency response missions, some of which are shown here. Today, this is possible today. We're working with a few agencies on different pilot programs, and we anticipate selling Hexa to these agencies, where they will work with them to have a managed approach to training their staff in how to use these vehicles, and operating these vehicles. So some use case, for example, is emergency first response by police. Police have helicopters today. They have very few of them because they're exceptionally expensive to operate, require a tremendous amount of maintenance. Helicopters for air ambulance use cost anywhere from $15,000 to $50,000 to deploy. So just an enormous cost. We can bring that cost down by about 90%, we think, and reduce first response times by 50% or more compared to ground ambulances. We don't see this as a replacement for a ground ambulance, as an example, but to get an emergency medical technician deployed to an accident site where minutes matter, to perform intervention while an ambulance arrives that can have more people, more payload for other life-saving devices. And Hexa also, pending some approvals from the FAA, could be used to transport a victim or a patient from that accident site to a hospital on a sort of unpiloted basis. So the pilot would respond on board, an emergency medical technician, stabilize the patient, can load them onto a stretcher, load them into Hexa, and say, fly to the hospital, and get response times reduced again by 50% or more, in some cases 90%. So we're really excited about the first response use cases, and have seen a lot of interest from different public agencies. Again, because of our ultralight status, this is possible today, and we're excited to continue to market these. In terms of the company's fundraising history, we've raised $9 million from a couple of tranches of seed investments. You're working with some of the top venture investors in the space, ATX Ventures here in Austin, Capital Factory also here in Austin, Team Global, and Point Nine are European-based venture funds, some of the top in our space, and a few others shown here. We've also received over $6 million in grants and awards from the Department of Defense. I mentioned contracts with the U.S. Air Force. They are supportive of evaluating and testing and demonstrating what these types of aircraft can do for defense. As well as many of you know, many of you may be investors, we have done several crowdfunding raises through Reg CF and Reg A, totaling about 7 million. So we've done this. 22 million sounds like a lot in some contexts, but to develop, launch production, and launch operational location for an eVTOL aircraft, it's very little. So we've been incredibly capital efficient. We're able to do this because our aircraft does not require lengthy and burdensome type certification. And so that has allowed us to move relatively quickly and without requiring hundreds of millions of dollars in capital as others in our space have. We've assembled a stellar team here at Lyft and our advisory board as well. I won't read in detail the bios of each of our folks. I will point out some on our advisory board: the former head of aviation safety at NASA, Charlie Justice, the founder and former CEO of iFly, iFly being indoor skydiving entertainment concept, location-based entertainment, Alan Metney, the boards and former chairman of both the Light Aircraft Manufacturers Association and the U.S. Ultralight Association, Scott Sever and Dan Johnson, as well as Johnny Dew from NASA, heads up some eVTOL working groups at NASA, and Colin Gwynn is an early innovator in the small drone space, having helped develop the original Phantom drone for DJI and launched DJI in the U.S. So with that, I'll summarize here. We're right on the dot at 1:30, and then we'll start to take your questions. So we're super excited about Lyft. We're building a future where anyone can fly. We think human flight is aspirational for most people, whether it's just to experience it once, whether it's to leverage it as a mode of transportation, to bypass, unbelievably congested roads in our major cities, or whether it's to deploy first responders and let public agencies really lessen their cost of air response services. We're really excited. And we've already, the hard parts behind us. I think we've developed, built, and tested and entered production of the first personal eVTOL aircraft in the world. Hexa approved to fly under existing FAA regulations, no certification required, no pilot's license required. We're inventing this new category that we're calling aerial micromobility. Some of you may be familiar with ground-based micromobility. You can hop on a Lime bike or a Bird e-scooter, and you can get around. And it's a great alternative in certain circumstances to driving. We're doing that in the air. So hop on your Hexa, fly from point A to point B over traffic. We're really excited to bring this into the world. We're, as part of that, are building the world's first network of vertiports. Right, we already have one launched in Austin. We have our next 4 or 5 cities identified, and we're bringing this show on the road. Right, we announced our intention to launch a tour several years ago. So some of you may have prepaid flights on this tour. We're excited to get those underway. We've launched and knocked out already 2 of our 25 cities on that tour. We're one of only 2 eVTOL companies really meaningfully in production and able to fly. And we're one of 3 that had achieved DoD airworthiness certification and have been supported by U.S. Air Force and DoD contracts. First to launch eVTOL pay per flight operations in the world, which we did in Q4. And we have partners eager to operate locations under license from us using our aircraft and equipment and processes. So we have partners that have signed pre-order agreements for over 300 aircraft. And we expect all this to support over 20 locations sort of by late 2020s, 2028, 2029. So that is my formal presentation. I will have Kristen rejoin and we'll dive into some of your questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Matt, and thank you to everyone for your great questions. As anticipated, we have probably more than we can answer, but I think we'll start up and kind of categorizing. So we'll start with the business and investment kind of questions first. A lot of regulatory questions as well, and then some about the flight experience. So let's get started. A very popular question is about the company going public and what are the plans for going public? When do I see a return on my investment? Those types of questions.
Yeah, those are great questions. We don't have immediate plans to go public. There are potentially a number of alternatives out there for us to consider, and we are considering different options. Traditional IPO, direct listing, SPACs. There still are some SPACs happening, although redemption rate seems to be extremely high for most companies trying to pursue SPACs. So we're looking at market conditions and the markets look healthier and healthier. Obviously, interest rates are high. There's still some kind of structural issues um, with the markets, in particular for our types of companies, kind of moonshot companies. So we're looking at timing on that, and yeah, we'll announce any plans we have when they get formalized.
Great. Okay, so this is also, I love this question because it's kind of what we're all about. The question is, with the aggressive competition in the market today, what role does innovation play in ensuring the long-term success of a lift company?
Yeah, it is a super competitive environment in this new industry. You know, uh, when you have a new $1 trillion market, there are going to be a lot of entrants, and we've seen a lot of um, aircraft developed by some of the large incumbent players: Boeing, Airbus, Bell Helicopters, others. Um, you also have a lot of newer startups who have, some of which have raised enormous amounts of capital, and some are already public through either IPOs or direct listings or SPACs. Um, Part of how we're innovating in the space is not just with new technologies enabling, vertical flight, but also with our business model and our go-to-market strategy. So instead of pursuing a similar model to what most people and most companies are pursuing, which is a 4-seat commercial air taxi approach, right, where multiple people are pooled into one aircraft, you have to meet at a centralized heliport or vertiport location. We think it takes a lot of time to get to these larger locations. Oftentimes, you'd be navigating through congested cities. You can, in many cases, have a very short flight, point to point. Many of these new vehicles that are being developed are much larger and more complex, of course, and require type certification and operational certification and production certification. There's a lot of certifications you need to get into that business. We have focused on single seat aircraft that we only care about flying short range. You don't need wings to fly 15 miles. In fact, it's much better to have a hover optimized vehicle to serve the market need that we're going after. So I would say it's a relatively conservative approach in in a very unconservative, ambitious new industry. So we took a simple approach. It's regulatory approach is very, very simple and straightforward. There's no pilot's license required for these aircraft, as I mentioned. So we're not only innovating with technology, but we're innovating and we're differentiated because we chose a path to market that has allowed us to achieve revenue already. And so we're first in the world to do that. We're going to be first in the world to build out a network of vertiports. And we think that our focus on small aircraft, hover optimized, less regulations, and getting to market quickly is a good recipe for success.
Thank you. We do have a few questions out there about the Department of Defense contracts and how much are we able to discuss about what we have accomplished with the DoD and what plans do we have coming up with the DoD and how much are we able to discuss that?
Sure. Yeah. So, with the U.S. Air Force and the Air Force's Agility Prime program, in particular, which was created to foster innovation in this space, we have actually completed all 3 phases of SBIR contract funding. So you start with phase 1. We've done phase 2, and then ultimately we've also completed phase 3. In our case, it was flight testing that we performed alongside the Air Force at Eglin Air Force Base. So we have actually completed the full spectrum of SBIR programs with the U.S. Air Force. We have recently been selected for. We're waiting on final contracting for an additional our next contract. We haven't announced that yet because it's not officially under contract. We expect that imminently, and we'll provide more information when we do get that. But yeah, we see opportunity, for defense, both for manned and unmanned versions of Hexa. I didn't mention it here, for lack of time, but we have an unmanned cargo version of Hexa. It's a completely modular system. There's 6 bolts. You can actually just swap the whole crown section of the aircraft, the top powertrain section, including the parachute, all the flight controllers, everything you need to fly. And we have basically a cargo base section where you can essentially just with a forklift, you can load a pallet of freight onto Hexa, and Hexa can take off and deliver, up to 350 pounds of freight, which I think is also very useful for, both defense and, emergency response and other areas for public agencies.
There's another question about, I'm just kind of now going more into the use of the aircraft. And a question, I'm going to give you kind of a couple and you can hopefully answer them at the same time. One is the 300 pre-orders for aircraft, are they primarily for non-entertainment use, or what use are those for? And then also the question of if and when Hexa will be made available to actually purchase privately. Maybe a little bit more about our decision to not do that right now.
Sure. Yeah. So the pre-orders we have from partners, I will say, are kind of non-binding letters of intent, and they are for the same initial operations under Part 103 or something comparable to Part 103, which is personal and recreational in nature, right? So rolling out location-based services where people can train and fly, and even fly, point to point, but limited to flights over uncongested areas. So those aircraft will be intended to be used. A couple of these partners we've announced publicly, so we can give you some examples. Marubeni Corporation is a very large Soga Shosha trading company in Japan. Last year, we signed an MOU with them, including an aircraft pre-order. We are partnered with them and hope to launch in time in Japan for Expo 2025, which is launching next April in Osaka, Japan. So we actually just got back from Tokyo, where we did some demos sponsored by the Tokyo metropolitan government. The governor of Tokyo was on site and had some kind remarks about Lyft and about eVTOL in general. Look, this industry is new. It has to prove itself. One way to do that is to fly first over uncongested areas. I don't think anyone is going to be flying any type of aircraft, certified or not, over heavily congested areas for quite a long time. Another eVTOL developer based in China has received a type certification and is in production. There are limitations to that certification and operational limitations for them, I think, initially to be flying over uncongested areas. So I think everyone's going to find routes. There are also routes that you can find. Some of the best routes for kind of transportation use of eVTOL aircraft are also over uncongested areas. You might imagine, flying from San Francisco waterfront across the bay. I think it's like 8 miles, so very short distance. And you can do that in, roughly 8 to 10 minutes instead of, a 50 or 60 minute ride in traffic in a car. Again, all over the water, all over uncongested areas. So there's a lot of opportunity to grow with sort of just one location, offering this for point A to A flights. And then there's opportunity next to pursue A to B flights, but still over uncongested areas. So just some color on the way we're thinking about rolling out the business. Again, this is new technology. The FAA is a risk averse agency, right? And they want to see track record. They want to see statistics. They want to assess safety records before approving flights over congested areas.
Great, thank you. And speaking of the FAA and licensing and track record, one of our questions is about the light sport aircraft type certification that you mentioned, the Mosaic. And when do you anticipate that coming into play? And how long do you anticipate the certification process for Hexa to take place?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think those rules will likely be finalized in, call it 12 to 24 months. Again, that's up to the FAA. The FAA has to formalize those rules, and then those rules are all actually based on. Sorry, I'm advancing the slides to get back, but those certifications will be based on industry consensus standards. So there's an organization called ASTM that I expect will be the organization that develops these standards. They develop the current light sport aircraft standards. We may participate with that industry organization to help develop the standards. But we have already looked at comparable standards around the world. The European agency is called EASA, and there's a category called very light rotorcraft and an ultralight class in Europe that has a set of standards for this type of aircraft that we referenced in our own design and in our own testing. So we expect to be able to be one of the first companies through that process, given we will have already been operating and actually have a safety record already and all of the proof and test points to achieve that certification, because we're leveraging our launch under Part 103 ultralight class first. So it really can be a dual aircraft, right, where you can have two identical aircraft. One is a Part 103 qualified, no pilot's license, but has limitations. And then the sport version of the aircraft will require a type of license to fly issued by the FAA, which of course will provide training for. And that will be it'll be certified, so it'll be able to fly over congested areas at night. All the limitations that exist for ultralights will be removed. So that process, it's hard to say how long that will take, but for us, because again, we will already have been flying for several years operationally, we think that could just be maybe a 12 to 24 month process.
We have a lot of questions about when and where people can do this. So I'll, if you don't mind, I can respond to that one. So we are, and a question about someone said, do I understand Austin is open for flight demos? We're actually open for business in Austin. And we have been, we've been operating from our location in the Austin area for some time now, actually since last year. We officially kicked off our commercial operations and our tour operations with a Good Morning America announcement. Someone flew, one of their anchors flew live on Good Morning America, and that's how we really announced that we have officially kicked off our customer operations. And so if you're in the Austin area or able to get to the Austin area, we are actually having customers fly. You can book your flight on our website, which is liftaircraft.com. And the response has been unbelievable. And to date, Matt mentioned our track record. All in, we've done thousands of flights now in our aircraft. And so we do have so much data And we wouldn't be having people fly if we didn't have ample data and didn't have that record. So we're excited to welcome you to Austin. If you're in the Austin area, please come and please contact us, support at Lift Aircraft. If you need help making your reservation, a couple of you asked questions about booking in the chat, so please just reach out to us. We are happy to help you. But Matt, I wanted to also throw over to you about the envelope in which we're flying. We had a couple of questions about pilot weight restrictions, and I thought that's just a good opportunity to talk about the flight envelope overall and what our plans are for expansion of the envelope.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And look, we're launching this business and allowing, offering training and allowing our customers to rent and fly this aircraft on a very sort of conservative launch. So as you might imagine, the very first thing you do, your beginner training, I said you can do it. It takes less than an hour. Some have completed it. Even Anderson Cooper flew for 60 minutes after about 20 minutes of training. And, then that doesn't enable you to go fly wherever you want without supervision. So what that allows you to do is solo in what we call our beginner mode, our beginner flight envelope. And so your first flight in Hexa, which as you might imagine, your first flight in any aircraft is you take off and you land. We allow people to fly in, essentially kind of like a football field size area, maybe 100 yards by 100 yards, depends on the footprint of the area. And there's actually a geofence set up, not an actual fence, a fence in the software that prevents the pilot from being able to fly outside of that. Same thing with altitude. This beginner envelope is limited, I think, to 35 or 40 feet above ground level in altitude. And so, you're not able to fly, the aircraft is, of course, capable of flying much higher and actually much faster too. The speed limit on the aircraft is a very slow, I think 5 or 10 miles an hour in beginner mode. We then are going to progressively unlock, the next mode, which is kind of our intermediate or normal mode. We've already, thoroughly tested this. We fly this ourselves a lot. We fly this for demos. It's, I think, up to 25 miles per hour. Up to, I think, 400 feet in altitude, and over a wider area. So, your first flight, you'll get a beginner flight certificate. Some people just want to experience flying around, and that's super fun. You can do that just as a beginner. If you want to advance, you will come back and get your intermediate certification, followed by an advanced expert. We're going to make this fun. You can unlock different capabilities and speed and maneuverability and flight range. If we have a location near water and you want to go take off and land from water, or you want to go fly and land someplace that's approved to land, then you can do that. But we're going to teach you what you need to know to do that in a progressive manner, as opposed to, traditional pilot's licenses require you to learn everything, because when you get in that aircraft, you can fly anywhere. But that's not how we work. We limit where you can fly, and by software, limit how fast you can fly. And so we're able to just progressively train you and allow you to flight in higher, faster, and farther. So that's our approach. Again, we think it's the safest, most conservative approach, to introducing this new technology. It allows us to build a huge amount of data in, what is a safer flight envelope with lower speeds and lower altitudes, before we expand to higher altitudes.
All right, so we have just a few minutes left. I have about 3 questions that I would love to get answered before we wrap up. One of them is regarding the manufacturing of the aircraft. Where are we manufactured? What is our capacity for production? And are we susceptible to change issues? Just questions in general about manufacturing.
Yeah, so we have fully designed and tested Hexa in-house. We have outsourced major parts of the fabrication of different components. So we, for example, our structures are made by a partner, Carbon Aerospace, based in Red Oak, Texas, but with also a facility in Thailand. So many of our composite structure, the whole aircraft is really carbon fiber composite. Those parts are made in Thailand from our partner, who by the way makes like commercial and military aircraft and has a long list of certifications for their production processes, which are not required, for ultralight aircraft production. So it's a higher standard than is needed. For those, we source other parts from all over the place. We have a supplier based in Belgium who makes 3D printed titanium parts for us. And our electrical components come from all over the world. Our autopilot system, our triply redundant autopilot system, is from a supplier based in Spain, one of the leading and only companies that makes a certifiable redundant autopilot system. So yeah, we source parts from all over the world. We're currently doing final assembly also with a partner in Red Oak, Texas. And I think there was a question about change management. It is, new technology and new components are coming out all the time. And so we're trying to, when you go into production, you kind of freeze the configuration. And so we've done that. We do have, multiple different versions and new components that we're testing. And ultimately, I mentioned this kind of Hexa 2. We haven't yet announced the, full change suite that'll go into that, but to give you a little tease, yeah, new types of batteries can allow for significantly improved flight time and range, up to double. So we're excited, about one of the great things about not needing a type certification is you can iterate more on a technology life cycle than on an aviation life cycle. If it costs $1 billion to get certified, you're not gonna change very frequently. If there is no certification process, we can change as fast as we can, self-certify our own safety and testing for each iteration, which we're being pretty conservative about.
We have another very popular question, and we get this question a lot. I am an early supporter. I purchased my opportunity to fly when Lyft was launched. When do I get to fly? We have a lot of people who are very excited to do this.
Yes, and we're right there with you. This is, we're 6-7 years in now. Many of our initial kind of prepaid reservation holders have had those reservations for a long time. Of course, it's always been fully refundable. So if anyone's impatient, you can get a refund. But you can fly now. When those reservations were made, we've started the tour already. Like I said, Tampa and Orlando, Florida reservation holders have all had a chance to fly at their locations. I think we've invited everyone from any of those prepaid reservation holders can redeem that flight in Austin. The calendar is open to you. You should have received like a voucher, where you book. You can put the voucher in and redeem your prepaid flight. So we're super excited for you to fly. We will be announcing our next tour stops. We're taking delivery of some really cool new equipment we're going to use for our tour, and really excited. We'll announce our next tour stops here pretty soon. But we will be making our way to your city So the answer to when you can fly is very soon if you're willing to come to Austin. We have a lot of great other events in Austin too. You can tie it in with Formula One or professional soccer or Austin City Limits. So highly recommend you visit Austin. But also we will be coming to you. It depends on your city and seasons and when we can get that tour stop scheduled. So stay tuned.
Okay, final question. Hopefully y'all have a couple more minutes to stick with us, but I think this one's important. Again, going back to the return on investment, and Matt, if you can expand upon, I know that you feel strongly about this. We actually have something that Matt wrote on our blog, if you're interested in checking that out on our website. But, at Lift Aircraft, our mission is to make personal vertical flight accessible to everyone. We feel the same about investing. And so the question is, I think there was some misunderstanding. We can't make promises or projections, of course, about return on investment. But the question was, I think, so there are no plans for investors for return on investment, which is not what you were saying. We have to be careful about what we can say. But can you share about the excitement and the potential for investing at this stage and through this type of an offering?
Yeah, of course. So traditionally, startup investments are made by venture capitalists and institutional investors. Like this is not my first rodeo. My first tech startup is called UShip, and we raised over 70 million through 4 rounds with only institutional investors, some of the best venture investors in the world. That's been a great company going strong. I actually was at the White House when President Obama signed into law the new Jobs Act. It was in 2016. And what this new act allows is for anyone, accredited or non-accredited, it lifted the cap of the number of investors that you could have in a private company with the SEC before you had to register, right? So, under Reg CF and Reg A, we can open up and, with Lift Aircraft, we found that this was a natural business we have so many fans, we have so many people that want to support this, that it seemed like we would be remiss not to invite individual investors in to invest really alongside of our venture and institutional investors. So that's why, we pursued kind of Reg CF and Reg A funding. Now you're purchasing stock. Please read the terms that are on file with the SEC. Our financials are all on file. This is the company is registered with the SEC. We hope and anticipate either an exit for all of our investors, and hopefully a good one with a significant return on your investment. Whether that be a public offering, that could be an IPO, SPAC, or direct listing. We're exploring options. We just don't have anything definitive to announce. Also, companies get acquired, and that is a very common, exit path for when you invest in private companies. We can't guarantee. It's a tricky world out there. Nothing's guaranteed. There's risk involved in, read all the disclaimers we have in our filings. Those are very real. But we also think there is an enormous opportunity to transform the world leveraging this new technology and our unique regulatory approach. And we think this is going to be a huge business that changes the world, and we hope you agree. And if you do, you can invest, and hopefully there'll be a great outcome as well.
Thanks, Matt. Like I said at the start of the webinar, we have so many questions that we knew we'd have so many questions. All of them couldn't be answered in the time that we had for the webinar, but we will follow up, and we will also be sending out a list of frequently asked questions with responses to those. So keep an eye out. This webinar has been recorded, and you will receive a link via email so you can rewatch. And please reach out to us, support@liftaircraft.com, and we'll get your questions answered if you have additional thoughts after you after you rewatch or just following the webinar. We really appreciate your time. Look forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, everyone.